never saw such rotten crap in my life.
Jolting tales of...
Okay, it's 2017, it's Horror Month, and we're back once again. Box Office Maniacs is back with Horror Month for 2017. And today, we're doing another great classic horror film. And kind of a franchise, because this is the start of a whole two films.
Over here on Horror Month, we do it right. They did 2 movies with CREEPSHOW, yeah. But that's not all they did, and we're going to review all of it.
Yeah, that's true. You know, we got a little bit more to add to the whole thing. So, yeah, what David said is CREEPSHOW. We're reviewing CREEPSHOW, the Stephen King, George A. Romero classic.
And one of the reasons we're doing this year is because of the passing of George Romero. And we really wanted to do some George Romero films, but unfortunately, the Night of the Living Dead films that he's done, it's really hard to get them on Blu-ray because they're very expensive, some of them. But, you know, and I think CREEPSHOW is one of the best things that Romero had ever did, so that's why we're doing CREEPSHOW.
Okay, so CREEPSHOW, the very first film, this classic movie, to this day, it remains, for me, one of my all-time favorite horror films. Because, first of all, it actually frightened me when I saw it the first time. It's one of the very few films that I can say the very first time I sat down and watched it, it scared me to death. And to this day, it doesn't scare me now like it did then, but it's still just as creepy and just as fun.
Yeah, I begged my dad to take me to go see this, Vince. I wanted to go see this so bad when I was a teenager. And because, you know, I loved horror movies, and the only way you could get into horror movies, at least back then, is you had to have your parents take you to go see it. So we actually ended up going to see it at the Avalon when it was like, I guess, a month or two after it was out. The Avalon was sort of the last resort theater. It's like it come there and then it was gone because, you know, it didn't exist after it left the theaters back then. And I tell you, it scared the crap out of me, Vince. I didn't know what to expect. Oh my God. I was like just terrified of this movie. Even though now you watching it, it's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be sort of a horror comedy. But when you're a teenager, you know, there ain't no comedy in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's comedy. There was definitely things we laughed at because the very first time I actually saw this was with you, and we were at your house, and we rented it, or something. I remember you had it on video, so we sat down in your basement watching this thing, and I loved every minute of it. I thought it was hilarious, but I also got frightened in it. I mean, the whole thing from the Father's Day thing, right from the beginning, that Father's Day episode, just, oh my God.
And everything about CREEPSHOW is great. Even the title, I think it's one of the best horror movie titles of all time. I just love the title. I love how they wrote the title.
CREEPSHOW.
I love the poster. The poster was one of my favorite posters to any horror film ever. I got the Blu-ray version of it right here, and it's kind of hard to see, but I'll do a close-up of it so you guys can see it. But, you know, it's Creep basically in the ticket booth, and he has like the tickets, and he's really creepy looking because he's Creep, and, you know, he has like the one eyeball, and it's just an amazing artwork, and it's one of my favorite posters ever.
Yeah, mine too. I also like the one from the cover of the CREEPSHOW book that we're going to eventually get to, but I always love that picture as well. And the movie poster, you're right, is just phenomenal. I love the poster for it. I love the font they used for the writing of CREEPSHOW and everything. I mean, just this movie, from the moment I saw, I barely remember seeing it, but I do remember seeing the trailers, but barely. And I remember them writing "CREEPSHOW" across the screen, and you see lightning.
CREEPSHOW.
I was like, man, I've got to go see that movie.
And it's just not that, too. You know, it's Stephen King and George Romero. And Stephen King wrote all these stories because of his love for EC Comics.
Yeah, and things like Tales from the Dark Side and Tales from the Dark Side came later, but Tales from the Crypt is what I was getting at.
Yeah, and I grew up with all that. I love Tales from the Crypt. That was one of my favorite short anthology shows. And, of course, there was Twilight Zone and Outer Limits. And I used to watch all that stuff. And nowadays, it's gone. I mean, the art of having 3 or 4 movies, I think the last really good one was Trick or Treat. I mean, other than that, they don't even make them anymore.
Yeah, there's very few that have been made in the last few years. I mean, CREEPSHOW was pretty much the most known one. Eventually, they did make, like I said, Tales from the Dark Side, and then they made a Tales from the Dark Side movie that was sort of like it, that had several stories, and they all kind of wrapped together. To actually find one now, it's very scarce. And find a good one.
Just the beginning of this film, everything about, like I said, everything about the film I loved. There was nothing about this movie I didn't like. Just the beginning of it, like when the kid is sitting there reading his CREEPSHOW comic, and our buddy's in this movie, Vince.
You remember who puts the friggin' bread on the table around here, don't you?
Our buddy.
Tom Akins is in the movie.
Oh yeah. From what's his name? From Dr. Yeah. that Vince. That's what I'm talking about. Chalice, Dr. Chalice. I was trying to remember his name from Halloween 3.
That, he was in The Fog, and he was in a bunch of horror films, and this is one of the ones he was in as the dad.
Yeah, it was only the beginning and the end, but he made an impact in this film.
We have reviewed all of these old John Carpenter films, and he was in a lot of them, so I really know who Tom Atkins is. And his commentaries on all the stuff that he did was classic. I mean, he was so cool in the commentaries, and I just love him now. I think he's great. And seeing him in here now, after all these years, it's just like, yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that Blu-ray that you have, it doesn't have any kind of extras whatsoever.
Well, let's talk about the Blu-ray here for a minute before we get back to the movie. It has a theatrical trailer, and that is it. It has 0 extras, a theatrical trailer, and there's nothing else to this movie. However, it's crazy clear after this movie, and I've always ever saw it on VHS tape, and I have an old DVD version of it, and this thing is amazingly clear. And, it's hard for me to recommend it because there's nothing on it. But if you want to see CREEPSHOW like you've probably never seen it before, which is crystal clear, and it was amazing to watch because you've seen all these details you've never seen before, and the clarity of the movie is worth the price. And I don't think it's very much, but just that is worth the price alone. However, also this month, they did make an entire separate Blu-ray called Just Desserts, all about the making of CREEPSHOW, and that's coming up this month too.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that, and we've got some other stuff coming up with all to do with CREEPSHOW as well.
So let's get into the movie here. Yeah, I mean, the Father's Day thing really freaked me out when I was a kid, and I think it was mostly because of just the way they have the zombies sound. They're so creepy sounding in this movie. And it's like they never really did that in any other films. They're just the sound of the monsters, and they're so creepy.
And he's walking across the ground, and he gets to the house, and the whole time you're just hearing his... And then he actually speaks, and you hear him saying, "It's Father's Day." And it's just, oh my gosh. And it's classic, and everybody knows that. Everybody, they might not know CREEPSHOW, but they know that line. It's really strange.
Yeah, and every one of these is a good story. I don't think there's really a weak one. If there was a weak one, it was probably the last story out of these. But most of these, I mean, they're all solid stories, and they all have sort of that twist ending, which is really cool, you know. And again, the Stephen King episode goes for comedy. Obviously, it's supposed to be funny. But again, when I'm seeing that as a kid, and at the end, where he's crawling around and he's completely covered in the moss and stuff, I'm like, oh my god, that's so horrible.
Yeah, I mean, he shows up in his other films, but this one, he actually did a whole segment, and he was fantastic in it. He did such a good job. And I mean, one of the lines that you and I always cracked up at was the whole
meteor shit. Oh boy, you done it now, Jordy.
So The Crate was one of my favorite monster movies without being an actual whole monster movie. You know, here it is. It's just this little segment in this film, and it's fantastic. I absolutely loved every bit of this, and the whole thing with Adrienne Barbeau. You know, tell it to call you Billy.
And we also need to mention here, there's a lot of stars in this film. I mean, there's a lot of big people in this film that actually became stars later on. And this one actually has Ted Danson and the Naked Gun guy. Can't think of his name.
Big star, huh?
He's a big star. Big star. Can't think of his name.
It was Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah, that's it. Leslie Nielsen from Airplane and Naked Gun.
So anyway, something to tide you over. This was an awesome little story, too. I think, for me, if there is a weaker one of the stories, it'd probably be this one, but it's not that weak. It's a good story. It's a good, solid story. Just out of the whole film, I think this is probably the one that gets a little... it's a little slow, but it's the way it ends up is just fantastic.
And he was using the cutting-edge technology back there, and that's really was pretty much funny to watch. He had all these VCR tapes. He's like, man, you got a really good setup here.
So then we come up to They're Creeping Up on You. Now this story, yeah, it's a little slow, but the whole thing of this story here is scared the crap out of me, mostly because I cannot stand, I loathe, I hate roaches.
See, I don't mind roaches. Spiders freak me out. Snakes, I don't mind. Roaches, bugs. Spiders, I don't like. I can deal with. If this whole thing had to do with spiders, I would have been, you know, not watching it. But roaches don't bother me that much.
He has them all in the blender, and oh my god! Oh, I thought it was going to be definitely one of the sickest stories out of this. And then, of course, the end. I'm not going to give it away for those people that haven't seen it, but oh my god!
The sad part about this, Vince, is I think there's a lot of people out there who have no idea what Creepshow is, and that's one of the reasons I think we're doing this Halloween, this horror month, is because people really should find out about Creepshow and find out what it is. And it's just such a great film, and like I said, all the stories are fun, and it's a fun movie. If you're an adult watching this, you will probably have a blast, but if you're a younger adult, teenager, or you know, if you decide to let your 7-year-old watch this, they will probably be scared to death. That's the good stuff, the good part about this movie. Some people will be scared, some people will be laughing their butts off.
Well, this also ushered in a lot of that comedic horror, that dark humor, that, you know, it expressed that more than other films did, where, you know, it's scary, it's gross, it's disgusting at times, but at the same time it's funny and fun. And like Evil Dead eventually kind of did that, kind of touched on that, but Evil Dead 2 really touched in on that. And I think it's a lot of that has to do with this. And there's only so few movies that can actually marriage comedy and horror, and this one does it to perfection.
Yeah, I can't think of a better film to watch in October. You know, just wait until one of those cold, stormy, windy nights and sit there on your couch and cover up and just pop this thing in. And if you've never seen it, it's a tragedy. But if you have seen it, it's still great. To this day, it still holds up to just every horror film that's out. It's actually better than most horror films out today. And it's incredible. Just absolutely incredible. And do yourself a favor. If you haven't watched it, make sure you watch it. And if you have seen it, why don't you take another look at it? Because it's just as good as you remember.
And one last little tidbit I'd like to mention. Speaking of George A. Romero, I actually got to meet him. Me and my son Brandon, we actually got to meet him at an FX show in Orlando several years ago. I actually did ask him about CREEPSHOW, and I asked him if he would ever do another CREEPSHOW film. And the one thing that he said to me was, well, it's been several years, so I don't have any rights to it. I don't have anything to do with that franchise anymore, but if they ever asked me, I would gladly do it in a heartbeat, because they were so much damn fun. So with that said, my rating for CREEPSHOW is, of course, the Jetty!
You see that crap? All that horror crap?